Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to our first Ready, Set, Respond of 2025. I cannot believe it's a brand new year, and we are back with a brand new lineup of guests to talk to you about multifamily operational topics that are impacting your communities. I'm your host, Carla J. Alisea. I am the Director of Research and Performance here at Apartment Ratings and Satisfacts. And I'm really excited about this year's lineup of guests. Now, if you follow me on LinkedIn, you may have seen a post that I did about all of these amazing female executives in multifamily that have gone and started their own consulting businesses. And what I love about that is these are women that I have followed my entire career, people I've admired, I've aspired towards, who've really set the standards in operations, in marketing, and they are out there now spilling the tea, sharing their secrets. Some of their content that they are posting on LinkedIn is so relevant. Today there's so much content being shared, so many people talking, saying things, vying for your attention. But these ladies, let me tell you something, they bring it. And actually today's guest, she posted something on LinkedIn that got my attention. We must have had a mutual connection. I saw her post and I said, we need to bring her on Ready, Set, Respond. She is no BS. She gets to the heart of the issue, and she shares some real tangible directives and information to help you operate your communities better when it comes to resident retention, when it comes to financials. She's got it all. So today, we're going to talk about one of her posts where she talked about fraud. Now, I reached out to her when I saw that first post from her, and I said, I've got to meet you. And I was really lucky to find out that she was in my hometown. So we had met for coffee, and we got to talking all about fraud. And she just opened my eyes to what you guys are experiencing out there in operations. The issue of fraud, evictions, write-offs has just completely increased since I've been on site. And I thought, well, let's talk about it, right? She went on to post that sometimes fraudulent renters, fraudulent activity can cost a community anywhere between $100,000 to $500,000 a year, and that it's no longer as simple as just a fake paycheck stub or a falsified employment record, that there are whole systems out there that are being sold just like a business, kind of like we talked about back in one of the first episodes of Ready, Set, Respond, how there are industries around writing fraudulent reviews, right? There are industries being built around fraudulent renter profiles. So we're going to bring on our guest right now, Stacey Hampton with Asset NOI. Welcome to the conversation.
Thanks for having me, Carla, and thanks to you for supporting the splash out of the multifamily professionals that are out here doing independent work for everyone.
Absolutely. I have noticed there are so many more investors, so many new management companies, and your expertise, your experience, and the successes that you have had can be so valuable to their investment strategies. And so I really wanted to use this year to amplify those voices. And Stacey, your voice is one that over the time, seeing your content on LinkedIn, I've really come to value and admire. So I'm so excited for my audience to get to meet you and to have this very important conversation about fraud, and not just, as you said earlier, how it impacts the beginning of the funnel and the end of the funnel. But here at Satisfacts and Apartment Ratings, we talk a lot about reputation and retention. And I remember during our lunch, I hypothesized that fraud was having an impact on those two elements. And you just kind of said, no, Carla, that's no hypothesis. That is happening.
It's not a suspicion. It's an absolute fact. Yeah, that was such a great conversation, and frankly, kudos to you for putting this together for us to talk about it, because I haven't seen anyone else talking about fraud from the standpoint of what it's like in the community when the fraudulent applicants move in. So I'm
Mhm.
really excited to talk about, a subject that I love to hate, which is fraud. I mean, it's the timeliest of subjects, and it impacts every single aspect of the industry. So
Yeah,
thanks
yeah.
for bringing me
Well,
on.
let's start with that post that you had on LinkedIn recently about these synthetic IDs and organized fraud rings. This just blows me away. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about what this is and your experience with it and why it's so dangerous for our operations?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I want to set the stage just a little bit. You know how when you watch a movie and somebody needs to get away from the law or whatever, and they need to change their identity, they meet some guy and he hands them a manila envelope and it has, plane tickets and a passport, seeming like you have to know people to get this, to get a fraudulent or ID. That's no
Mm-hmm.
longer the case. Fraudulent IDs can be purchased on Facebook, TikTok, any Twitter. That's one of the biggest changes. They're being marketed through social media channels and in various different ways by these what I call fraud syndicators. They're people who are making these fraudulent documents and building these identities to sell to the public. So if you're looking for an apartment or what have you, and you come across one of their ads, they're luring you in saying, I can get you approved anywhere you want.
Mm. So it is almost just like the fraudulent review rings, right? Someone is paying now for a service. Um, what what do we need to look out for if we're running an application? What are some tells that the identity that's applying for our community, for our apartment, may be part of one of these rings?
Mm, that's probably one of the most difficult things to do because of how sophisticated they are. It's the industry has put a lot of resources into addressing fraud and implemented a lot of different solutions. So fraud and the syndicators of it have stepped up their game as well, and they're continuously stepping it up because they're making money doing it. They're selling these fake documents and fake IDs. Um, so one of the ways that you can really kind of, I guess, indicators is when you're having at a property a lot more skips and evictions. So you've got
Mm.
people who moved in, maybe only paid a couple of months, and they moved out. But catching them beforehand is really, really difficult. It's not like the times before where we could look at and we're like, this check stub looks suspicious. This, they're very, very highly skilled at creating these documents, and even more so, and this being the challenge, a lot of times they're real. So
Oh.
you're not looking at a fake check stub. You're looking at a check stub from a company that is registered and using ADP, for example. One of the big changes in our industry was, the ability to read these digital documents and say, oh, this one's been altered.
Mm.
They're actually able to create businesses and create check stubs through ADP that are undetectable with document screening softwares.
Mm. So when we're thinking about application fraud, I mean, that's what I think about. I think about, those fake IDs or stolen social security numbers. Somebody stole somebody else's identity, a fake income or a fake business. I'm giving you my friend's phone number and telling you it's a company, right? Fake rental history. But what you're saying is a synthetic identity is that whole package bundled up in a way that looks very real and can get past some very sophisticated, detection tools.
I would say that I would even go a step further and say it is real. So these are real social security numbers. They're real driver's license. They are real bank accounts, and they are real check stubs in every way that something is real on paper, right? Like
Mhm.
you're using these stolen social security numbers, and sometimes they're referred to as, credit privacy numbers, or essentially they're fake identities, but they're real social security numbers. They belong to somebody. And they'll say things like, well, stars use this is completely legal. And so not everybody who commits applicant fraud starts out wanting to commit applicant fraud. A lot of times they're sold by these groups on Facebook and social media that this is legit. And then when they get in there and they're like, it's a credit privacy number. And when they get in contact with them, they're telling them this is a completely legal process. And so what I'm really talking about is essentially fraud syndicates build up what I call Frankenstein, or sometimes referred to as Frankenstein identities, right? It's a stolen social security number, and you can take the information they provide you and go get a state ID under a different name. You asked me one of the indicators, and keep in mind that there are so many different ways that applicant fraud is perpetrated that there's no one answer to all. But a lot of times you'll see that these synthetic IDs use identifications instead of driver's license. And one of the reasons for that is because voter registration laws in states require states to make it easier to get IDs. And so they're able to get identification without some of the burdens or the hurdles that others have to use to get identification. They can't get a driver's license, but they can get an ID with very little information.
Okay, so to the audience, if you've been on Ready, Set, Respond, I like to poll and get your opinions. So if you can get your phone out right now, scan that QR code on the screen. And what I want to know is, what are you experiencing when it comes to screening your applicants? Are you catching or seeing instances of fake income, fake pay stubs, inflated earnings, misrepresented or false identities, falsified rental history? Or do you think that you're seeing that synthetic identities, or maybe you're not having that problem? You're not seeing any of it, right? None of the above. What are you experiencing out there? Well, here we had a feeling this screen was going to light up, and there you go. Wow, false rental history coming at 31, 42%, income, pay stubs, inflated earnings, 13% saying they're experiencing that synthetic identities. Yeah, it's definitely happening. When you do your analysis, because you're out there, you're digging into all these different clients' financials, you're doing forensic analysis of all of their operational procedures. What are you seeing when it comes to that application process? You mentioned the other day 42% denial rate.
Yeah. So that's the thing is that nearly every community has some practice and some solutions in place to detect fraud. And so one of the biggest changes over the last, and anybody in property management that's here on this episode will tell you, is that our denial rates have gone up. They've skyrocketed. So 42% denial rate is an average for the properties that I've worked with over the last 2 months. So imagine that you've got 100 applicants and 42% of them being denied for whatever reason, whether they didn't pass your document screening or identity verification, or maybe simply they just don't have a rental or credit history that qualifies. Frankly, our qualified renter pool has shrunk quite a bit in the past 4 to 5 years.
Yeah. Tim added in the comments that he's seeing people who were previously denied coming back in under other individuals. So kind of like a sublet, an unauthorized or illegal sublet situation, which could also be considered fraudulent.
Absolutely. And that's a good point, Tim. One of the things with the denial rate that is kind of, it's kind of surprising, but it definitely happens is, if you're using some sort of fraudulent documentation, a lot of the times if they get denied, they'll just come back in with another fraudulent or synthetic ID. So they'll just lease again the next day or a couple days later.
You got to be so vigilant, don't you?
You do.
Absolutely.
You do.
Now you mentioned you threw out some big numbers, Stacey. 100,000 a year to 500,000 a year in losses. Where are we seeing that in the budget? How is that fraudulent activity impacting that community financially?
Unquestionably, the biggest areas are the write-offs, and so that's rent that's not being paid and backed off or backed out as write-offs, and then vacancy. When a property has fraudulent renters that don't pay, not only do they not pay their rent while they're living in the apartment, but then there's also a vacancy period because you have to turn that unit again and you've got to find a new renter for it. And so, and oftentimes they've also, particularly right now in a lot of markets, they've also received a concession. So your net rental income is hugely impacted. But I will tell you that communities are spending more on marketing and more on turn expense as a result of fraud as well. So there's almost nowhere in the industry it's not being impacted by fraud.
Norman added a comment. He said, we have seen the same in addition to the person who applied is not the person who picks up the keys. Now, when we're doing that check-in, is there a recommended process to make sure that we're I mean, I never had to do that when I was on site, but I guess we're in a whole new era. How are we verifying, that the person who applied is the person who we're giving possession of the building to, of the premises to?
That's a great question. And again, I hate this, but there's no, full stop solution for it. But I would recommend that when someone picks up the keys, and if you think about it, it's the right thing to do because you don't always remember every face that walks through the door. Maybe, you lease the apartment, but you're not there that day, you're off, and your assistant manager is giving the keys. Yeah. A very quick, easy practice is to verify the identity of the person that's picking up the keys.
Well, what's really interesting is Satisfax does the biannual online renter study every other year. And we do ask a question in that study of whether you rented your apartment sight unseen. And that percentage has been slowly but consistently going up. I think, and I might misquote this number, but I think I remember it being close to 22% in the last study. I'll have to double check that, but it was and is consistently going up. So that could also be, a red flag. How are we making sure that we're verifying that the people who are applying online sight unseen are who they say they are? Some myths about fraud I thought were really interesting. Which one stands out the most to you, Stacey?
I think the biggest misconception is that it primarily affects B and C class communities. I think that's starting to change, but a lot of people had the idea that maybe A class or high rises or these communities weren't impacted, but I definitely in my work see that these communities are being targeted. And not only are they being targeted, but one of the things that the fraud syndicators do is they publish what they call CPN or synthetic identity friendly communities. It's communities that they have rented apartments from before, and basically their system works, and they'll give this list to someone who's looking for an apartment and saying, here's what you have to choose from. And I will tell you from looking at those communities, they are at least 50 to 60% what I would consider to be A-class communities with rents over 2,000.
Yeah, we have Stephanie saying she's in an A-class brand new construction, and she said it's really bad. 3 exclamation points there, I think.
One more thing too to mention is that it's also impacting affordable. Affordable is being challenged with vacancy for the first time in most of our careers, because they are the renter pool, qualified renter pool has shrunk, and they are dealing with fraud as well. So they're having a lot more turnover than they have in years past. It's impacting everyone.
Okay, audience poll, phones up, polls up. I want to know, on average, how often do you encounter application fraud in your operations? Is it 1 out of every 5 applications? Is it 1 out of every 10, 1 out of every 20, 1 out of every 50, or never? We don't see this issue. You're not having any fraudulent applications coming through your system. As the audience weighs in on that question, Stacey, it seems to me, if we identify that we might have an issue, right, with fraudulent applications, that's a pretty big alarm bell for operators to say, hey, we need to shake up our application process. Something's slipping through the crack. We need to look at other solutions. We need to change it up in a certain way. Keep those syndicators guessing and scrambling so that they can't get through your gates, right?
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, what we really have to do as an industry is make it difficult for them. It's difficult for people to rent apartments right now because of some of the challenges for renters that maybe stemmed from COVID when they were laid off, and so it's created an industry, a highly profitable industry. Syndicators are responsible for billions of dollars of fraud just in multifamily, and they're making money because of these challenges. $2.3 billion a year that individuals are making, helping others commit fraud or committed fraud themselves. We've got to address it as an industry in order to make it very difficult for them to make money doing this.
Yeah. Norman just weighed in again. He said that the fraudulent applications tend to actually gravitate towards those new constructions and lease ups because they assume that we're desperate for occupancy, that we want to fill up the building, and so we may be a little bit more lenient in our processes. But again, what is really the objective of a lease up? Is it to have occupancy, or is it to be financially stable, right? So weighing that out. And I do see this argument. Also, I think a comment on your post on LinkedIn, a gentleman said, what's that balance, right? We don't want to make it so hard to apply and to get through these screening tactics that we lose real renters, valued renters, because they'll go somewhere else if they can get approved quicker and faster and easier or whatnot. So how do we balance out the ability to screen out as much fraud as possible so that we're having that positive effect on our bottom line, while also keeping that process accessible for our valued renters?
No, I think that it's very valid concerns for operators. One of the things I will say is I think it's a lot about how you present it. It's incredibly important to us that we thoroughly screen the residents of our communities here.
Mhm.
And I think that, they'll definitely understand that. Like it benefits them
Mhm.
immensely when, when site teams and property management companies cross their T's and dot their I's
Yeah.
um, for screening. And here's the other thing I would argue is I don't think if you had someone rent an apartment, unless they were looking to move in immediately, which does happen, but I still think you can somewhat mitigate it with once they've leased an apartment. I don't think they're going to cancel because it takes you too long. Right now, maybe if it went 2 or 3 weeks, but if you need an extra 24 to 48 hours for approval, I think that and they understand that you're doing that to verify that who lives in that community. I think they're definitely going to not only understand but appreciate it.
Yeah, something along the lines of we take fraud detection very seriously here. Because of
Mhm.
that, our application process is going to take on average between 72 hours or 3 to 5 days. We do this to secure our community, blah blah blah. Making sure that you position it in that positive light. Also, that in itself could probably act as a deterrent, right? If you're saying when you
It does.
apply, we do have a sophisticated fraud detection system that takes an extra 24 or 48 hours. We do this for the benefit of our community. Maybe that'll scare away some fraudsters, right? It's all in how we position it, how we market it. For our marketers, I'm sure your brains are going, "Oh, how can we work on that?" Now, when fraud gets through our gates, we do everything we can to try to get them, to get those gates in place. But if they get through our gates and they move in, I suspected, and you said absolutely, that it's having an impact on the community's reputation and on the community's ability to retain their valued residents. Explain for our audience that effect. What's happening there?
Yes. Well, what I'm seeing is that you think about the context of how fraudulent renters become a part of your community, and particularly in the instance of synthetic IDs, you're talking about somebody who isn't who they said they were, right? So they're not going to worry about their rental history. They're not going to worry about their credit history even. So there's some anonymity that really emboldens some renters. This isn't all of them, right? So I don't want to represent that, but what I do see in these communities is that when there's a lot of fraudulent renters, and to quantify a lot, it's not at all surprising to me when I see 5 to 10% of the units being rented by probable fraudulent renters. They're emboldened by the anonymity. So community policy compliance.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about adhering to quiet hours, adhering to our policies about how long guests can stay. And even more serious is that there are people with criminal intentions that rent these apartments under fake identities, so that they can conduct their own business. And that's really not rare. If you were going to embark on a criminal enterprise, whatever it might be, you would definitely want to rent an apartment under a false ID, so that if for whatever reason there were attention brought to your apartment, when they go to the management office and they want to ask you about, the person who lives there, it's not you. And in fact, one of the examples that really surprised me was, a property that I worked with that they had an incident. Unfortunately, it broke out into gunfire, and yeah, thank goodness someone was hurt, but I think it was one of the people that was involved in it, and they left the scene. So when the police, showed up and they wanted to know who lived in that apartment,
It wasn't a real
um,
person.
it wasn't the real person. It
Mhm.
absolutely wasn't. And so they weren't able to, as far as we know, capture the renter that was living in that apartment. As a matter of fact, the neighbor told them that the person that they knew lived there was under a totally different name than what was on the lease.
What was on the lease. And yeah, so those types of incidents, whether it's just policy violations like noise or an incident as egregious as a shooting, we know that those end up online, on your Google, on your online reputation, and it's hard, right, to overcome that over and over again.
There are two things that in reviews residents will write about most frequently. One of them is maintenance issues, and the other is safety. And so when you've got a portion of the community that is not adhering to the community policies, whether it's putting out their valet trash on time, or whether it's having, not adhering to quiet hours and disrupting them, they're going to put it online. And the challenge is that when property, unlike a typical resident, when a property management goes to that resident and tries to address those violations, they're not addressing someone that they didn't adhere to your policies when they moved in. They're very unlikely to adhere to your policies while they're living there.
Exactly.
And so it's a real challenge, not just in that, but also evicting them is a challenge, because who are you evicting? You don't know.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It definitely shows up in the
slippery slope. Absolute slippery slope. Okay, one more poll for our audience. In your experience, do fraudulent renters negatively impact a community's reputation and online, or a community's retention and online reputation once they move in? Have you noticed this in your operations dealing with fraudulent renters? Where is that having the most impact for you? So as you're weighing in, I'm seeing a lot of questions. Stacey, what can we do about it? What do we do about it? So that's, my next question for you as everyone's weighing in on this question. What do we do?
You know what, guys, we do what we've always done, which is solve problems and care for our communities. So there's a lot there's several actions that we can take, not only in preventing fraud, and I will be honest with you, there's no one solution that prevents all of it, but we can definitely take action to minimize and mitigate. We're going to minimize the incidences of fraud in our community, and we're going to mitigate it when it happens to get through, because these guys are, and technology is constantly advancing fraudulent documents, identifications. So we've got to be on top of them, and I 100% know we can outsmart them. I don't know of a single challenge multifamily hasn't been able to rise to. So what you're looking at here, we'll start with what can you do on the front end. It's really, really important that you have a stack of solutions that address the different types of fraud and how it's perpetrated. So the stack is really, it starts with the most important aspect, which is to verify their identity. And that's more than just verifying whether or not their driver's license or ID is valid. It's verifying that they, in many ways, who they are in the aspects of, does their addresses sync up? Does and frankly, there's been a lot of advancements in AI helping us be able to not just look at their driver's license, but look at who they are overall, and does it make sense to the information they provided us? And then you can kind of go through this, that when you verify their identity first, go to their credit and criminal screening and go through their employment verification, verify their Social Security number is valid. One of the things I see a lot of is somebody who's 50 years old and they have no credit history. That's really suspicious, right? So it's like, okay, you're 50, you have no credit, or you just got credit last year. there's software out there that's able to measure all these aspects and consider it in your approval process. And then, bank and income, again, remember I told you they're bank accounts that are real, but they're owned by synthetic identities. So there are ways for various different software and solution providers to go through and measure the length of time and how much money that's been put into that account, and be able to verify to a large degree whether or not it's valid. So digital forensics has a part in this entire process. But here's the thing, you can't completely deal with fraud all one and done solution. So you need to mitigate it with deposit replacement and deposit insurance products. And what that basically means is that if for some reason someone gets through, you want to be able to have something in place that offsets some of that risk, because fraud's going to continue to develop. There are numbers out there that say they expect it to triple between now and 2028. And I believe that to be true.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I've seen a couple of operators, and I like this idea. We were talking earlier about centralization, and our research at Satisfax suggests that renters really want to know the team that's managing their building. But I think when it comes to screening an application, this is a perfect opportunity for centralization. Our on-site teams are busy. I mean, let's just be honest. They have so much on their plates when it comes to taking care of the residents, making sure the asset is being preserved, doing the customer service, the events, all the different things that land on their plates. Having that centralized, experienced team specific to understanding this, topic, what it looks like, how it presents, might be better equipped at catching fraud, testing new softwares, putting different procedures in place, and then coming back to that site team with those results. I know I did have a team once that I had looked over where we had a fraud department. And I had to personally let a couple of applicants know, hey, I'm so sorry, your application got flagged for fraud and has been denied. I was able to say, I'm sorry, I'm not involved in that process. The decision is sent to me by the fraud department. If you want more information, here's all, the legal required contact info that I'm going to give you. But I was able to maintain that customer service orientation towards that applicant, and plausible deniability. So that's something to think about if you're dipping your toes in centralization. This might be a good place to start. What do you think about that, Stacey?
You're absolutely right, because frankly, the human involvement particularly in the screening and approval process should just be, to the best degree, a check and balance of what the system has provided, right? Yeah. So at this point, even myself and anybody I know, the human eye, you see all the various different aspects of this. We alone can't, the days of being able to look at an application and say, wow, this looks fishy, is over, right? That's a totally unreliable system. So being able to centralize the application and approval process so that site teams can really focus on the warm and fuzzies, right? So they can really focus on the individual that's moving in and their experience, because honestly, we as individuals it's so sophisticated now that we're not a lot of help. So as much as we can take ourselves out of the process and really just kind of be the last line that looks at, more evaluates our process and whether or not we think it's working, which brings me to the next thing. If you think you have a fraudulent resident or applicant, this is something that I don't hear a lot of people talk about. Definitely notify your screening partner, whoever you're using to screen applicants. Give them that information. You might find, and often do find, that they have some sort of, they can identify the fraudulent aspects of that applicant, and they have a solution in place that would have caught that particular type of fraud. So I think it's really important. They'll tell you what they need, but they're there to support you. Send them the ID, send them the social security card, send them the income, and see if there's something they could do within your current system in place that would have caught that, even if you don't know, right? Because we don't always know it's fraud, but if you suspect it, get your, your executives and management team involved and your third party screening. The other thing to do is, if you have a patrol service, notify your patrol service and document the incidences or the disruptions, right? Because a lot of these patrol services have the ability to verify identities. And remember what I said, one of the most important things for us to do as an industry is to make it difficult. And if we already have for fraud to take place, but also if we make it uncomfortable for them to live there by verifying and enforcing to the best of our ability our policies and documenting it, it'll make it a lot easier for a non-rent breach of lease to be executed.
Understood that, yeah. Last poll, guys. I want to know, how confident are you in your operations of your ability to detect and prevent rental fraud? Do you feel like your system is doing a really great job? You're very confident, you're somewhat confident. Maybe you're just kind of like, I'm not really sure. You're not confident at all, or you have no confidence whatsoever in your system. You feel like it's letting in way too much. Let's see where you guys are at. Somewhat confident, somewhat, little neutral, somewhat. Got 7% very confident. They've found that secret sauce. For those very confident people, maybe on our LinkedIn page, we're going to have a post. Maybe you could share some of the tools and systems you have in place that you're using that are working for you with others. On this show, we try not to recommend any specific products. There are a lot of great partners out there in our industry, some from inside the industry, some from outside the industry, really trying to solve this problem. There's a lot of different solutions. So if you're using one that you like, share that on our LinkedIn page. Let's start that conversation. Also, guys, scan this QR code. If you're not following Stacey, I highly recommend you do. Like I said earlier, she posts some really great content, some no fluff, down to business tips and tricks and advice for operators. So definitely give her a follow. Stacey, thank you so much for bringing this conversation to Ready, Set, Respond and to our audience. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everyone who's going to watch this or is here with us. I'm in this fight with you to win, and I'll be in it. So I look forward to fighting with you and making it very difficult for fraud at your communities.
Absolutely. And again, like I said earlier, we're going to have that post on our Facebook and our Instagram. So add that comment. We'll be judging those comments at the end of the day, giving out a little special thank you to our favorite comment. And then also up on our registration page, our next Ready, Set, Respond webinar, we're going to be talking about the real reason why your residents leave with Sarah Graham, the founder and CEO of Six Dots. So make sure you register for that conversation. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.